Greetings, Scott County Scholars. This is Mr. Burgoon. I'll be your host here for this lecture covering World War II. Let's start off here by looking at the aggregate numbers here. Of course, World War II was extremely expensive. You can see a large portion of the world's industrial capacity is put towards the war effort on all sides. I want to highlight here the third bullet point on this slide here, and that if you look at these numbers, you'll see as in a continuation of the total war that happened in World War I. For every soldier who was killed in this conflict, there are 2 civilians. 85% of those casualties are going to be on the Allied side and 15% on the Axis. The vast majority of those casualties are going to be born in Eastern Europe, Soviet Union, and in China. That's where the greatest loss of life is going to occur, both in terms of soldiers and civilians. But really important here in terms of world history, the impact of World War II is that Europe, that had been on the rise since around 1500, kind of culminating there in the age of imperialism, where they carve up the world and have conferences where they take rulers and carve up whole continents. That world order with Europe in charge is going to be destroyed in this conflict, and we're going to see a new world order established that is what we call bipolar. And there are two of the secondary powers during that European world order that are going to come to prominence. That is the United States and the Soviet Union. After World War II, they are going to be the two what we're going to call superpowers now in the world, and they're going to vie for influence over the world. The empires that Europe had created in that old world order before World War II are going to disintegrate, and those countries and nations that had been imperialized and taken over by Europe are going to gain their independence in a period here after that called decolonization. Especially in developed countries, gender relations and social relations are going to be changed greatly by this very cataclysmic event here in the middle of the 20th century. Total war, again, this is a concept that really comes into its own here in World War I. World War II is basically World War I refought with a vengeance. The ideas of nationalism that led Europe into the First World War didn't go away. In fact, we've got nationalism 2.0, bigger, badder, meaner nationalism afterwards. Of course, industrialization has made war much more deadly in the in-between years here. There is going to be huge government control in both the fascist states and the socialist states and in the democracies over governments over the economy and over individual rights here. And that is to focus all of the nation's energies there, first and foremost on the war effort, and then secondly on the home front. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the ensuing slides here. All citizens were engaged in some way, shape, or form, whether they were going to lend money to their national government in the form of bonds, whether it be women going into job areas that were normally conducted by men who are now poor, or direct government control over the means of production. An example of this is in America in the later part of the war, there were no automobiles made by automobile manufacturers for the domestic market. Those automobile manufacturers were ordered to make goods that were deemed necessary for the war effort, whether they be jeeps, whether they be tanks, whether they be tractors that are used on the front. That's just one example there. In the home front here, we see extensive use of propaganda used by all governments. Of course, the fascist governments there in Europe, the Soviets and the communists, and of course even the democracies are going to use propaganda as a tool, melding their nation into one cohesive unit against their enemies here. Rationing is going to be used by the governments, and what that means is, say for example here in the United States, people could not buy gasoline every day of the week. You could only buy it on certain days of the week. Meat was rationed. Goods that were deemed necessary for the war were rationed so that they weren't used in surplus on the domestic front, and they were made available for the war effort. Here's some examples here. Carpooling was considered patriotic as it conserved the resource of gasoline there that obviously is very important to fighting an industrialized war. The woman on the right here, they're basically saying that, hey, espionage is another facet of total war here, and that if you work in some sensitive industry and you know some sensitive information about the war effort, do not let it slip. Here are two sides here to World War II. There are main players here, which are outlined here, but much like World War I, a lot of the globe is going to participate in this conflict because a lot of the globe is still controlled as part of an empire, one of these main players here. Anyways, the Axis powers here are going to be Germany, Italy, and Japan. Italy is going to be the first to be defeated, and Japan the last. The Allied powers are Great Britain. They're Anzac allies here. France is actually, it's contentious whether they're an Allied power because they're going to make peace with Germany pretty early on. We've got the Soviet Union there, the U.S.S.R, and of course the United States. That's a lot of words on one page. Let's just try to go over this really quickly here. What we're going to see here is the Axis nations are going to become very militaristic and aggressive and nationalistic, and we've got a weak League of Nations, which the United States did not join, unable to contain the aggression of these fascist states here. The first fascist state here in Europe is not Germany, but it's actually Italy, created under Benito Mussolini there. The fascists, again, the word fascism comes from the guy who holds the bundle of sticks there in the Roman, as a symbol of the Roman military. They're going to borrow that, and they're going to say, hey, we're recreating the Roman Empire here. We're creating an Italian empire, even though the Italians, again, were late to national formation, and consequently they relate to the imperialism game, so they have to go into, I don't know, double step here to make their nation great. In the 1930s here, Germany is reeling from the economic conditions that were created by the Versailles Treaty, which were really unfair towards the German people. And the German people are in the midst of a horrible depression, and here comes a man who promises not only to grip them out of that depression, but also restore their pride in nation, and that man is Hitler there. By the mid-1930s, Mussolini, in recreating his Roman Empire there, has invaded Libya and is going on to invade Ethiopia. If you remember from your imperialism in Africa homework here, Ethiopia and Liberia are the two uncolonized countries there in Africa. The leader of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, is going to go to the League of Nations and make a very eloquent speech, basically saying, if you let them do it to me, they're going to do it to you later. That speech is actually going to be canonized and put into popular music by Bob Marley. And it's also becomes true, as we're going to see here in a little bit. Anyways, Hitler in the mid-1930s here is going to send in troops to a border region of France there that has a sizable number of ethnic Germans. And both Germany and Italy are going to support the rise of Francisco Franco, who is a fascist in Spain. They are going to. This is basically the Spanish Civil War is a training ground for the Germans, especially the German Luftwaffe or Air Force is going to get good training time there for the ensuing conflicts that happen afterwards. Anyways, by 1937 here we have the alliance of the Axis powers here, and Japan is going to invade China, which brings me to a very important point here. World War II, if you ask Americans, started in 1941. But if you ask Czech people, they would say it happens in 1938 or before, 1936. If you ask Chinese people, World War II happened or began in as early as 1931. So it's really actually a long conflict, even though American involvement in it was pretty short-lived. Okay, there we have it right there. So all of these, you can see here, all of these treaties that were created by the League of Nations or by a conglomerate of imperialist nations there are going to be shattered by the Japanese invasion of Manchuria in 1931. That Manchuria, as you know, is the northern part of China. And if I want to go back to that second slide there, when we looked at the numbers there, when we talk about civilian casualties and the brunt of those casualties being borne in the Eastern Europe, Soviet Union, and China, this is one of the most disgusting episodes here, where civilians. This is a unfortunate example of total war, where civilians in Nanking are directly targeted by military with gigantic losses of life, and really just one of the most barbaric episodes in human history that we've learned about so far. There we have our fascists there, and we have our nationalistic Japanese leader there as well. In the late 30s here, things start to heat up in Europe as well. We have German annexation of Austria there, or the Anschluss. If you remember there, back in the unification of Germany, Prussia and Austria had fought each other for who was going to lead the German-speaking region of Europe there. Clearly Prussia won there, and this is kind of like the final unification here of all of the German-speaking people, or most of them, into one political unit there. The British Prime Minister Chamberlain is going to call a conference in Munich. Hitler is going to ask that a conference that he have a small sliver of the Czechoslovakian state, where again there is a sizable ethnic German minority there called the Sudetenland. He's going to say, hey, all I want to do is protect these ethnic Germans here from the Czechs, right? And if you allow me to get this little piece of them, then I promise I'm not going to make any more demands from you, and then we're going to be good. In 1939, Germany and basically takes over all the rest of what was remaining of Czechoslovakia there, and creates some what they call protectorates. The Bohemian Protectorate, the Moravian Protectorate, and Slovakia. The Nazis and the Soviets are going to sign a non-aggression pact, which includes them dividing up Poland between themselves, which had happened earlier in 1775 between the Prussians, Russians, and the Austrian Empire. So it happens again to Poland. Thus, World War II begins. Unless you're Chinese, then it's already began already, 8 years before.
This morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine.
Yeah, here he is here, Neville Chamberlain. Um, he basically is a character in history who people laugh at now because he thought that he had wrought peace from Hitler, and he had done nothing but basically give in to all of Hitler's demands and get nothing from him. And of course, Hitler took that as a hint that he could do what he wanted in the future. So Neville Chamberlain is not well remembered in Britain, in Europe, or the world at large. Anyways, September 1st, 1939, the Germans invade Poland. They crash across the border there. Again, the Germans are going to say, "Hey, listen, large parts of Poland were part of Germany here before World War I. We're just recreating, the place that we used to have here." Right? Again, that sense of nationalism there. There's a brand new form of war that was made possible here by late industrialization, which is known as Blitzkrieg or Lightning War, and that's because of so much of the new technology, whether it be all-terrain vehicles, tanks, or airplanes, that has been incorporated so seamlessly by the German army by this point in the late 30s. These gentlemen here are German officers who are breaking down the Polish border crossing. These are German troops marching into Warsaw pretty soon after their invasion of Poland. The Polish army simply was, even though resisted and was very valiant, simply was no match for the industrialized machine of the German army there. There are several theaters of World War II here. Again, here are the most basic ones here. We have the Western Front here in Western Europe. Again, fought in France, just like World War One, with a little bit of different twist here. Now with new technology here from late industrial and societies here. Aircraft is going to take the war to Great Britain. Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union, what's today Belarus, Ukraine, Russia, Poland. These places are going to see significant battles and significant losses of lives, both in military and, more importantly, in civilian numbers. In the Pacific Theater here, we're going to see very large amounts of loss of life in China, in Indochina, which is what is today Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. In the Pacific Islands that we really haven't spoken much about in world history here, since actually we populated the world here and said that human beings went and populated those places. So we're coming back to them in a little bit here. Of course, in northern Africa and the Mediterranean here, we're going to see fighting as well in the deserts of North Africa there, and then eventually with the Allied invasion there of Italy. All right, the early European war there, or I guess not early if you are Polish. Anyways, Hitler attacks Western Europe there. That's through Belgium, the Netherlands there into France. Pretty early on in the war there, right? 2 or 3 months later, France falls to Hitler's attack. Or we should say that France surrenders. Beginning in 1940 here, with the new technology there of the airplane, the Germans are going to attack Britain, trying to beat them into submission. Again, we're going to revisit the concept of total war. They're going to attack direct civilian populations, civilian centers there. So they're going to attack places like London and try to basically destroy the morale of the British people so that they will not want to fight that war anymore, and they'll demand that their government negotiate some type of settlement with the Germans there. 1941 is a very momentous part of the war. That is when Germany makes the fatal mistake of invading the Soviet Union, and Japan invades Southeast Asia there, or Indochina, and then makes the mistake of attacking the Americans there, thus bringing America into the war. Here we have pictures of British soldiers there leaving mainland Europe there as France quickly fell to the German onslaught in the Western Europe there. Here we have pictures of subway stations. Subway stations being used as bomb shelters there, as the Luftwaffe, German Luftwaffe, drops bombs directly on civilian targets. Winston Churchill here is the Prime Minister of England at the time. We're going to see some strange bedfellows here. Winston Churchill is a rather conservative British Prime Minister. He's going to be a great wartime leader. He's going to be allied with a very liberal American president and a very enigmatic and barbaric Soviet leader there in Stalin, against their common enemy there, which was Hitler and Mussolini and General Togo there. Anyways, like I said, pretty early on here, France, or at least northern France, is occupied here by the German army. There we have Hitler here, and just look in front of the Eiffel Tower, chilling like a villain, because that's what he was, a villain, bad guy. France was very torn, actually, because France had entered into pact with Britain that said that they were never going to negotiate a separate peace with Germany, and yet here they are in June of 1940, negotiating a separate peace with Germany. The British are going to feel like they have been abandoned by the French. The French are going to say, hey, you weren't invaded by Germany, we were. And then we have the creation of the French Resistance. Alright, here we have the General Charles de Gaulle there, who's going to be the leader of the Free French. He's going to be, obviously he's going to have to leave France there. You've got the Free French flag there. And we don't have a slide about it, but there's actually a whole part of France that isn't directly occupied by the Germans, but is more or less subservient to the Germans, is known as Vichy France, the southern part of France. And so there's kind of a divided legacy here. Most French would like to remember the French resistance against the Nazis, but the reality is that a large segment of the French population collaborated with the Nazis, and that was exemplified there in Vichy France. Let's flip the globe around here, spin it around about halfway, and we're going to have a look at the Pacific theater of operations here. As you can see here, if you remember the DBQ we did here on the Japanese Meiji Restoration there, and its response to European imperialism, basically what they did is they saw something that worked and they copied it. And here we have, by August 1942, the extent of the Japanese empire that they had created in a really short time. It's really kind of impressive. You can see there that the Korea, which they had taken over very early on, Manchuria, the coastal regions there of China, which, by the way, is the place with the highest population in China. Indochina there, which is Southeast Asia. They're pushing through Burma towards British India, which would be a real big success for them had they taken it. They had pushed and took away the Malaysian peninsula there from the British, the Dutch East Indies, which is today Indonesia, and a whole host of islands there in the Pacific that really haven't played a large role in world history until this time. So if you look here, you see they've gotten pretty close to Australia. They've gotten pretty close to India. These are two of places that were imperialized there by the British there. They've taken over their much larger neighbor there, or most of their much larger neighbor there in China, and they're doing pretty well for themselves. Or the Philippines, yeah, they took that from the United States. The Allied strategy here after the attack on Pearl Harbor there on December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy, that sees America enter into the war. The Americans and the British, what they have left here in the Pacific Theater, are going to basically use these islands that cross the Pacific here as staging points to slowly get back to the chip away at the Japanese Empire and get close enough so that they can use their new technology, the airplane, to, again, total warfare, target Japanese civilians in the Japanese homeland there. 1942, we have basically the apogee here of Axis power here. You can see in this kind of old school map. Okay, here some 3 turning points that happened in 1942. The Battle of Midway. The United States basically tricks the Japanese into bringing their aircraft carrier fleet. The Japanese don't know that we've decoded their codes and lie in trap. We do trap them. We destroy their aircraft carrier fleet, which leaves that brand new technology. Not that they can't use that new technology of airplanes there, but it's harder to project those over the entire Pacific Theater there if you don't have an aircraft carrier to move those airplanes into the various aquatic domains. In the North African theater there, you have the Battle of El Alamein, which stops the German advance on the Suez Canal. In other words, the Germans entered into Libya there with their Italian allies and quickly realized that, hey, if they could control the Suez Canal, they could cut the British off there from India and can really control the entirety there of the Mediterranean and further squeeze the British at home there in the British Isles. On the eastern front of Europe there, you're going to see the Germans push far into the southern steppe of Russia until they reach Stalingrad in August 1940. This is from August 1942 to February 1943. Stalin basically says, I don't care how many people die, we cannot lose this city to the Germans. One being the reason that he's that city's namesake, but more importantly, behind that city lie the oil fields of the Astrakhan and Baku and all of the oil deposits there of the Caspian Sea region there. So at huge costs, Russia just basically throws men into that battle until they win against the Germans. But they do win, and that turns the tide there against the Germans there in their ill-gotten operation invading Russia. Battle of Midway Island. We talked about that. Yeah. Named for a reason. Midway to Asia there. Operation Barbarossa or Redbeard there. Okay, this is the Nazi invasion there of the Soviet Union. You can see they went down into Belarusia and Ukraine and up into the Baltic to the siege at Leningrad, Smolensk, and then down there at Stalingrad in southern Russia. Yeah. Never get involved in a land war in Asia. Yeah, by 1943, the Americans were island hopping towards the Japanese mainland there, and firebombing cities there in Japan. Little known story that more people and more cities were destroyed in Japan by conventional arms, firebombs, again, total war, direct targeting of civilian targets in Japan by the American government, than by nuclear weapons. We're going to see here that after the Germans are defeated there in North Africa, the British and Americans are going to invade Sicily and then the Italian peninsula there. Italy is going to be knocked out of the war pretty early on, and the Soviets are going to continue to push the Germans out of the Soviet Union there, out of Belarusia, out of Ukraine, back into Poland, and Czech Republic, and Slovakia, and Hungary, and eventually back into the German homeland there of East Germany. And then we have here D-Day, which is the Allied invasion there on the coast of France. So if you think about this, France surrendered in 1940. In June of 1940, and then 4 years later, that front is going to be opened up again by the British, the Americans, and their Anzac allies. This was, by the way, what the Russians were asking the Americans to do and the British to do for quite a long time, because the Russians were sustaining very, very heavy casualties on the Eastern Front. And they wanted us to start a Western Front that would make it easier for them to fight the Germans. Anyways, D-Day is going to be successful there. They're going to establish a beachhead there on the European continent, and then from that beachhead, liberate France and push on towards Germany. There we have the Allied liberation of Rome. There is D-Day there. You've got the Americans here, the British and their Anzac colleagues. So Canadians and New Zealanders and Australians participated in this as well. Very famous, the Band of Brothers and that, Saving Private Ryan are all about this D-Day. Okay, hey, just like World War I, when the Germans saw the end in sight, they said, hey, let's give it one last push. World War I, they got really close to Paris. In World War II, we have the Battle of the Bulge. And basically, they find a thin spot in the Allied lines, and they try to push as hard as they can in a last-ditch effort in an area that was heavily wooded, and people thought that they would never attack through, and that's the reason why it was lightly defended by the Allies. Battle of the Bulge lasts pretty, it's one of the hardest fought battles there for the Americans in the European theater. But it was Hitler's last stand here, at least in Western Europe. By 1945, Mussolini has been found in northern Italy and hung publicly, along with his mistress. By later on in 1945, with the Soviets coming in through Berlin, Hitler is going to commit suicide with his mistress in his bunker. At the end of the war, you've got the big three. This actually happens before the end of the war here. We've got Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister, conservative. We've got Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the rather liberal American president, and the murderous Stalin from the Soviet Union meet in a city called Yalta on the Crimean Peninsula to discuss how they are going to divide up um, Europe after the war, how they're going to divide up the conquered countries. Germany surrenders on May 7th, 1945, and soon thereafter, the United States unleashes a brand new technology called the atomic bomb against the Japanese, forcing them to surrender. The United States was very keen on ending the war in Japan as quick as possible because by that time, Roosevelt, who had a somewhat of a relationship with Stalin, was dead, and we had Harry Truman, who detested Stalin and who wanted to keep the Soviets out of Japan so he wouldn't have to divide it up with the Soviets the way he had to divide up Germany with the Soviets. Here is the big three there: Winston Churchill on the left, Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the center, and Joseph Stalin on the right. Yeah, in Yalta, which is now a part of the Russian Federation, apparently. Yeah. When Eastern Europe is liberated, the Allies come across these extermination camps that were created by the Nazis, and really not just by the Nazis, but Europeans sympathetic to the Nazis in all these countries. So one thing about World War II is that everybody likes to blame the Germans, but the reality is that there's French that send Jewish people to these camps. These people who are sent to these camps come from Austria, they come from Poland, they come from Romania, they come from the Czech Republic, and there's only one country in Europe that refuses to send their Jewish people to be exterminated. That's Bulgaria, and they rightly assumed that if they send their Jewish people to get killed, they would have no more intellectuals or educated people. Yeah, this is probably it's a toss-up between the Holocaust, the rape of Nanking, and the Stalinist purges as the most disgusting episodes in human history in terms of total disregard for the value of human life. These people right here are slave labor. They would be worked until they died, which is actually cheaper than gassing them. And those gas chambers that you always hear about were part of the final solution. In other words, the Germans knew at that point that they were losing, and they said, "Hey, we've got to kill them as fast as we can. We can't afford to wait for them to die of starvation or being worked to death." There we have that's the nuclear weapon that the United States used against the Japanese. By the way, the United States is the only country in the world to have used nuclear weapons against civilians, or really have used them at all. So we own that dubious distinction. Let's look here at the casualties in Europe here. As you can see, the Russians bore a significant amount of the casualties in the European theater here. In Russia, they call it the Great Patriotic War, and it is true that Russia probably would have defeated Germany there without us, but it's not sure whether we would have defeated Germany without them. So the Russians claim that they won World War II, and they earned it because they did lose a heck of a lot of people. You can see there that the second highest casualties there would be Poland. Really the third highest casualty is the entire Jewish population of Europe. And then the third would be either a toss-up between Germany and Yugoslavia. Casualties here again in the Pacific realm here, you can see the vast amounts of people who died here in China, way more than in Western Europe. Okay, so I'll flip back here. Look at all the people who died in the Soviet Union and Poland. Look at all the people who died in France. Oh, 3 skulls. Look at all the skulls there in China. That's where your greatest loss of life is in World War II. Not many people know that for some reason. Yeah. At the end of this war, the old imperialist powers and the new imperialist powers, so your Britons, your France, your Italy, your Germany, are largely in a state of ruin, and who you have as something brand new called a superpower is the Soviet Union and the United States. And they are going to dominate the latter half of the 20th century until 1991, when the Soviet Union collapses, and then we have a sole superpower in the world from that point until today. And that was the whole shebang. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something new. Good night.